Hello and welcome to today's tailoring class. In today's class, we're talking about pleats and we'll be talking about 6 pleats. Most of them are related, so once we get on with it, I'm sure you'll be able to understand. We'll also talk about the figures according to fashion that will be good for pleats and those that you have to avoid putting pleats on when you are designing a garment. All right, so before we dive in, I would suggest that if you are here for the first time, or if you're watching us for the first time, that you subscribe and hit on the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video is uploaded. And if you've been with us for a while, I would also say thank you and hope you enjoyed today's video. So let's get on with it. The first pleat I'm going to be talking about is a box pleat. But before we go on, let's talk about the fashion figures. So in fashion, we have the T figure, the A figure, the O and the H figure. Now, the T figure are those you would call, or are those you term as the upper part or the upper torso is bigger than the lower torso or the bottom. So the upper part is bigger than the bottom, which means that the bust area, the shoulder and the bust area is bigger than the bottom or the hip area. So for this, it's always ideal to use pleats or gathers or flares to enhance the figure so that there will be a balance at the top and at the waist area. So let's say we had pleats here, because pleats and gathers always gives volume. Okay, so then the pleats will balance up the upper part of the figure. Then we talk about the A figure. Now the A figure are the people who have their bust area smaller than the bottom. So the hip area is much bigger than the top part. For those people, I would advise that you completely avoid giving them pleats or putting on pleats or gathers or styles that have bulk in them. I'd rather say that you go for the straight cuts or the fitted, and rather avoid those with bulk, because they already look bigger down at the bottom and we don't want to add extra volume or fabric to make it a bit overwhelming. So to cause a balance in it, you'd rather take the pleats and the gathers at the top, where it looks like there isn't much, over there, so that it balances out with the bottom. So actually, fashion is used to enhance the figure. Whatever figure you have shouldn't be a problem, because you can always use fashion to enhance it and look beautiful. So we move on to the O figure. The O figure are those that you can't see the waistline. So you actually don't see the waistline. The upper torso and the lower torso are together, so there isn't a defined waistline. For them, I think it's ideal if you do not use pleats, because they already look, you get it. But if you can also use pleats but not use heavy pleats, so instead of using a full pleat, you'll probably be using a half or a 3/4 pleat instead of a full pleat or a full flare, because it gives bulk and it makes them look big. The H figure is what they'll term as the ideal figure in fashion. So they have the upper torso and then the lower torso balancing out. So both of them, both the upper and the lower torso, look equal in proportion. None is bigger than the other. So that is what they call the fashion ideal figure. For them, you can also use pleats. For them, you can use pleats either at the top or at the bottom, depending on the style, wherever you want your pleats and your gathers to go. It's ideal for you to use it for them as well. So let's go over again. It's ideal to use pleats for the T, the H, and sometimes the O. For the A, I would advise that you avoid using pleats at the bottom bit, but you can always put the pleats at the top. Okay, so these are the main things I'd like to talk about in today's class regarding pleats. Now let's go on to the box pleat here that I have done. So this is what gives the pleat the name box. This feature is what gives the pleat the name. For the box pleat, part of the pleat go to the right and the other to the left. Okay, as you can see, this is going to the right and this is pleated towards the left. Now you can see, when I say pleated towards the left, it means the fold is folded towards the left, and then a part of it is folded towards the right, and then you have your box in the middle. So that is it for the front and the back of it. So I did a sketch out of this, and hopefully in this class I'll be able to just do a brief demonstration of this skirt, but for the other pleats I'll just go ahead and then pleat them out. Okay, for this project, what you would need is you need your fabric, you need a scissors, you need a tape measure, you need a tailor's chalk, a measuring tape, and of course your pins. You would also need your sewing machine when you are ready to stitch. But before we go on, let's do a little bit of calculation in terms of the pleat before we get on with it. So you'd have to take the circumference of the waist area. Okay, so all around the person, that's the circumference of the person. Around the waist area is what you are measuring. And then if, let's say, if that is 12 inches, okay, let me work with 12 inches for this project. If that is 12 inches for the circumference of your client or the person you're sewing for, you're going to have to add 2 inches. Okay, so I'm going to add plus 2 inches here as your seam allowance on the sides. Okay, so that brings it up to 14 inches. Now, depending on where you want to put your zip, if your zip is going to be on the side of the figure, then you don't need to add extra inches to it. But if your zip is going to be at the back of the figure, then you're going to have to add an extra 2 inches to your calculation. Now, this is what I mean. If, for instance, I want an opening at the back of the figure, then we're going to be splitting this bit here. So I'm going to have to add 2 inches to my actual calculation. But if I'm going to have my opening at the edge, at the side here, like what I have, I can always take that measurement in from our seam allowance on the side. So for that, then I do not need to add any extra inch to it. Now let me bring it back to this bit. So this is the actual figure, the actual circumference figure, which is 12 inches, and this extra inch is the 2-inch seam allowance on the zip on the side of the skirt. We want our seam allowance to be on the side, so I'm going to leave it at 14. But if I wanted the seam allowance to be at the back, then I'm going to be adding an extra 2 inches to this, and that makes it 16. Okay, so then it means that the waist measurement I am working with will be 16. But at this point, I do not want my seam allowance to be at the back of the skirt. I want it to be on the side, so I'm going to maintain it at 14, leaving my actual waist measurement at 12, and then 2 inches extra seam allowance. So I'm working with a 14-inch waist measurement. Okay, so 14 inches times 3 if you want a full pleat. Now, what a full pleat, when I talk about a full pleat, what I mean is that the pleat is going to be full. You get it? So this is a full pleat. You can see that the fabric folded in is a lot. Okay, so that is a full pleat. A half pleat, you don't measure full. And I'm going to talk about what I mean when I start pleating up. So I'll be going for a full pleat. So 14 inches times 3. What would that be? 3, 4, 12 plus 1, 3, 1, 3, 4. So we are talking about 42 inches in measurement. 42 inches will be the length of the fabric we are going to cut lengthwise. But I want you to know that, let's see. So if you look at it, I'm going to spread out my fabric out. I'm going to measure all of this and see what I have. When I measured my fabric out, I have 41 inches, but I can work with it. 41, 42, that's not bad at all. So this will be for the whole circumference of the skirt. That 42 inches is the whole circumference of the skirt. Now, what you have to do next is to put your fabric into 2 equal halves, like I have done, and then I'm going to split it into 2. Okay, half of the fabric will be used for the back of the skirt, and then the other half will be for the front of the skirt. All right, so this is it. One half and then the other half. Now let me explain. So this top here will be the circumference of the skirt, half of it. Okay, now the bottom is going to be my hem. Now you always have to take the length of the skirt you're doing. It depends on you. If you want a short skirt, a longer skirt, whatever skirt you want. As for the length, it's up to you to take it. So for this project, I'm going to measure out my length of skirt I'll be getting in the end. So it's 9 inches. After I have done everything and finished off my hem, I'll probably be coming up to 7.5 inches. So what you do next from here, after you've prepared your fabric, is to finish off the hem. Okay, so it's always advisable to finish off your hem before you put in the pleats. The first thing you have to do when you're doing your skirts is to finish off the hem. So I'm going to do 1/2 inch fold and a 1 inch fold is what I'm doing to finish off the hair. I just use the machine to hem it. Don't be worried about the color of the thread. It's just for you to see exactly what I'm doing. Let's start pleating. Now let me just talk about something briefly before we start our pleating. Now, as I said earlier, we are doing the box pleat, okay? We'll be doing the knife, accordion, cake, inverted and stitched on pleats later. But I'll be doing a full skirt with a box pleat. Now let me go on to say something. I said earlier that you're going to multiply 3 by the circumference of your figure plus your seam allowance, okay, for a full pleated skirt. If you're going to be doing a half pleated skirt, you're going to be multiplying your full circumference by 2. That is when you don't want too much of your pleat going in. Now let's go on to the box pleat. So we are pleating the box pleat for the front. I'll put my fabric into 2 equal halves like that on a fold, and then I decide how wide I want my box pleat to be. Now this is what I mean, how wide I want my box pleat. I decide how wide I want this pleat to be, and if I decide that I want that pleat to be 2 inches, now let me show you what I mean by that. So this is 2 inches. You get it? So I wanted the box pleat in the front to be 2 inches. If I decide I want that to be 2 inches, so from my fold, I'm going to put in a 1 inch marking on this end here on one side, okay? A 1 inch marking here. Don't be worried about the front marking. If you do it at the top here, you'll be stitching that bit away, so your marking will not show. So I put 1 inch from the fold, 1 inch here, and then I decide that I want the rest of the pleats going on the right also to be 1 inch in size, all of them, okay? So then from that point, I'll be putting in my 1 inch marking through. So I'll just mark 1 inch all the way through like that, okay, all the way through. Then I'll flip it over and do the same at the back. So from this edge, I also put a 1 inch marking from there. My 1 inch marking, I put it through. Then whatever I did at the other end, I put it all the way through. So I'm going to carry on putting my 1 inch marking through on the back as well. Okay, so I did that for the back and the front. When I open it, you will see that from the center fold, because we pleated 1 inch on the side and 1 inch on the side, we have 2 inches in the middle. And this is going to be our box pleat for the center. Okay, now let's start pleating. So whatever I did on this fabric, I'm going to be doing the same on the back fabric as well. Okay, now let's start pleating. So from this fold, I'm going to pick on this line, skip this one, and then put it on this line. So watch me do it. I'm picking on this line. I'm going to fold this in and then place it on this line. Okay, so we've done our first pleat. So this is a full pleat. Now a full pleat is when you pleat equally as the gap you left. So you see that this 1 inch goes in and come and sits on this 1 inch. You get it? So that is a full pleat. Now if I was doing a half pleat, pick it from here and place it straight onto the next marking. That's the difference. Okay, so I'm doing a full pleat. I'm picking it from here, skipping this line and placing it on my third marking. That is this one. So you see that the fabric we've left is bigger than what a half pleat will give us. That's the difference. Okay, so I'm going to carry on in that manner. I pick up the next line, skip this one and place it here. Okay, pick this one, skip this one and place it here. Okay, so I've done it for this side. I'm going to turn it over and do the same going this direction. this pleat went this direction. When I flip it over, I'm going to pleat towards this direction. So I pick it from here, skip this one and go on this one. Okay, so I'm going to carry on in that manner until I finish. I'm doing that for the front and the back fabric, and then I bring it back. Okay, so I've gone ahead to run a stitch at the top of the pleats just to keep them in place, and I've taken the pins out of it. As you can see, the stitch is quite close to the edge of the fabric because you're going to be fitting a band over there. So I've done that for 2 of them. So that's the front and that's the back. Okay, then I went ahead to cut a waistband for the skirt. Now I cut the waistband at 2.5 inches wide and then 8 inches long. I'm going to show you how I got my 8 inches. Now after I finished pleating, when I measured what I had for half of the waist circumference, that is for the front of the skirt, I had 8 inches. Now the actual waist measurement was 12 inches in circumference, and when you divide that into 2, you have 6 inches. So my pleat gives me 6 inches, and then I have a few inches on the side for my side seam. You remember we added 2 inches for the side seam, so 1 inch on the, so half an inch here makes 1 inch for the front, and then for the back another half an inch makes another inch for the back. Okay, so this gives me 8 inches long and then 2.5 inches wide. I did 2 of that. Okay, so I'm going to be stitching it onto this. Now this fabric is stiff enough, so I don't need to put in any interfacing or anything there. I'm just going to line it up to my waist area like that. Okay, I'm going to line it up and then I'll run a stitch along it, all of it. So I'll do that for this and do that for the back as well. Okay, so the right side, on the right side of the skirt, pin it, and then I'm going to run a stitch at 1/4 inch. Okay, so my stitch length should be longer than this we did. So if this is an 1/8 stitch, I'm running at 1/4 inch, so this will be hidden in there. So 1/4 inch here, and then 1/4 inch on this as well to stitch it in. Okay, so I've done it for both of them. Now the next thing to do is to attach the 2 of them together. So this is for the back and this is for the front. Okay, I'm going to be putting the skirts together. So you have to make sure that this seam and this seam are joining. Okay, and remember to stitch. So we are stitching at 1/2 inch all the way down on this side, on one side. Okay, all the way down, and on this side, because you're going to be attaching a zip to it on this side, we don't stitch all the way through. We stitch up to half of it, the length. So we're going to stitch up to about this point and then leave the rest. Okay, so from here going down, leaving this bit for zip. Okay, so whatever zip you're going to use, usually is an 8-inch zip for the skirt, but this is a smaller skirt. So for demonstration purposes, you're going to start stitching from here. You back your stitch up and then you stitch straight down at 1/2 inch, and here too we do the same thing here as well. To here, 1/2 inch on this end, 1/2 inch on this end. That will be taking away the 1 inch for this side, and then 1/2 inch on this end and 1/2 inch from the back will also take away the 1 inch, so that in total we've taken away the 2 inches we added onto the waist circumference when we're cutting the skirt. So I'm going to go on to stitch at 1/2 inch and 1/2 inch and bring it back. Okay, so I've stitched it on one side here. The next thing is to finish off your waist area before we go and stitch the other half. It makes it easier that way. Okay, so I'm going to open it up like that. Try and press this seam open. Okay, you press it open, then we fold 1/4 inch in like that, and then come and place it on this seam line. Okay, so 1/4 of an inch, fold in, and then we place it on the seam line like that, and then run pin it down. So I'm going to do that to finish the whole bit. Okay, 1/4 of an inch seam, fold, and then I place it on the seam line here. Okay, all right. So I'll do that through to finish all of the skirts on the other side as well. So I'm going to pin this down. Then I move on to this side to do the same thing here as well. When I finish, I'll run a seam. I'm going to turn it over and rather run my seam here. So I'll run a seam at the edge, very close to the fold, all the way through. Okay, and when I do that, it catches on at the back as well, and then it sews it down. So that is why you have to place your fold on the stitch. Okay, you do the seam on the front of the skirt, just so that you see exactly what you're doing. So here we are, we've come to a waist measurement of 6 inches, and then a side seam here. As you can see, this is where the zip will be going. So for now, I'll just put some pins to keep it in place. Now let's do a few checks. We have to make sure that our seams are matching. So the seam lines are matching on both sides, and our hem is also matching. So everything seems to be in place for the skirt. So this is the back of a skirt, and this is the front of the skirt. Okay. So we've come to the end of today's project. So for today we did a box pleat. So this is the part 1 of a video with the box pleat, and then we used it to make a full skirt as demonstration for you to see. In the other videos we'll be doing the remaining pleats, just a demonstration of how to pleat them without making a skirt with it. So stick and stay tuned as you watch for the other video. Until we meet again in our next video, have a lovely day.